Now, SecurityTheater pops up usually when people are frightened and the politicians feel like they need to do something and they don't really know what to do. Sanitizing surfaces? Disinfectant? Hand sanitizer proliferation? Are these things even useful? The Rational View. The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Alan Scott. On this episode, I want to talk about something that bothers me. It's a little bit of a rant, but it's also important in that it wastes time. And I think it needs to be discussed. It's been termed by some SecurityTheater. SecurityTheater is basically things that people do to have the appearance of security, to make people feel more secure without actually making them more secure. And it's a big part of our lives, and it's becoming a bigger part of our lives all the time. I want to talk about why that is and what we should do about it in a rational public policy forum. As always, if you enjoy this content, please press like on your podcast app, send me a comment, and join the discussion at our Facebook group at TheRationalView. And also, I'm very excited about our upcoming episode with Neil deGrasse Tyson, director of the Hayden Planetarium. So please stay tuned to the podcast. That's going to be coming up very soon. And I can't wait to ask him questions. And if you have any questions, send me your comments on the Facebook discussion group. I'd be happy to share some of the top questions with Dr. Tyson. So, SecurityTheater. This comes in various forms. And it's basically things that you do that waste your time, that are ineffective, that waste money, and that don't improve security. Maybe they improve the appearance of security. One that you're probably all familiar with is companies requiring extremely complex passwords for computers and for accounts online. Nobody can remember them, and you have to change them every 3 months. And this is a horrible problem. And the passwords have all these weird things. You have to have a capital letter and a small letter and a number and a weird character. And you have to remember these things. And you have to change them. You can't keep the same ones. You can't follow a pattern. You can't cycle through them. There's so many different rules. And this is supposed to make our online presence safer, or make our accounts safer. But think about this. If you have to make up a password that you can't remember with special characters where you have to stand on your head while you're writing it and all of this weird crap, you're not going to remember this. So what are you going to do? What do most people do? They write it down, probably on a piece of paper near their computer. Now this is not highly secure. This is not a good idea. What you want to do in password protection is have passwords that are easy for the person to remember but difficult for a computer to guess. So two odd words put together, something from your mind that would be recognizable to you but difficult for a computer to randomly guess. Here's a clue. Most people that hack accounts don't guess your password. Certainly it happens on the simple ones, A, B, C, D, whatever they are, 1111. These are guessable. But most of the hacking out there is done through social engineering. And if you don't know what social engineering is, then you're probably a victim. I'm sorry to say. Social engineering is when people, say, post to Facebook a post. You've probably seen it. It says, hey, your porn name is your middle name and the first car you owned. Post it. And everyone will post these funny porn names. Or everybody's first job was McDonald's. Prove me wrong. And everyone will post their first jobs. Well, if you think about that, these are all password hints, aren't they? And nobody needs to guess your password if they can get you to tell them your password hints. So please, please, please do not respond to these people on Facebook posting to ask about your password hints, where you were married, what your first job was, what your first car was, what your mother's maiden name is. These things you should keep to yourself. What's another time waster? And this isn't maybe SecurityTheater, but it's these terms and conditions novels that you have to read and respond to every time you install a new software program, or every time somebody updates their iTunes app for the 12th time in the month. You have these 100-page terms and conditions things that you just click the box and say, yes, I accept. And this is a waste of everyone's time, because nobody reads them. If you can't be bothered to make your terms and conditions in simple English that people can read quickly, you're basically just trying to fool them. And it's not ethical. Sorry about the rant. So that's the introduction to SecurityTheater. But there are more, I would say, more important, bigger issues that we have to deal with in SecurityTheater. And one of them that has become more topical recently is COVID-19, the pandemic. There's a lot of security theater surrounding the pandemic and what we do for COVID. And let me describe what I mean by this. So when COVID first came onto the scene, people didn't know how the disease was spread. It's a coronavirus. We know these things could spread through the air. They could spread on surfaces. They could spread through contact. They could spread. We weren't really sure at first how these things spread. So people were instructed to take a lot of precautions. And many of these precautions included sanitizing everything. And I know I did this too. I would go to the store and I would sanitize all of the produce that came back and wash it and wipe off the milk bags and, wipe everything with Lysol disinfectant. I've got bottles of Lysol stockpiled now for some reason. And what scientists have found is that there's really not much evidence that COVID virus passes through contact with surfaces. It doesn't seem to survive on surfaces for long enough to be a significant risk. The most major way that COVID spreads, and I had mentioned this in my original post or episode on COVID, is through the air. And now we know more that this is exactly how COVID is spreading, is through the air, especially in indoor spaces where you're sitting for long periods of time with an infected person. And the best defense for this is wearing a mask and having a vaccination. And none of them are perfect. Wearing the mask is not perfect. Having a vaccination is not perfect. But together, these significantly decrease your odds of getting COVID. Better, obviously, to stay just outside and not sit in a restaurant inside with a lot of people with no masks on, because that's the worst thing you can do, especially with the Delta variant, which is out there now, which is even more contagious than the original COVID virus. So sanitizing surfaces. You go to the grocery store, they wipe down the conveyor belt. Everywhere you go, they wipe down everything. There's sanitizer everywhere. There's alcohol vapors in the air. There's the hand sanitizer when you come in the door. Sure, hand sanitizer kills germs if it has the right alcohol concentration and you slather it on your hands and let it sit there for 15 seconds. And it's not bad that people are doing the sanitizing, right? It does prevent the spread of nasty bugs, bacteria especially. But I think people are starting to get prevention fatigue from some of this. And by focusing on ineffective methods as a form of theater and ignoring more important methods of preventing the spread, we will end up as a society doing a worse job. More people will get infected, more people will die. What are some of the things that are going on? Some of the maybe a little bit crazy things out of proportion things. Well, I read an article. New York's Transit Authority is on pace this year to spend more than $100 million cleaning and disinfecting subway trains. $100 million on something that, what the science says, doesn't really impact the spread of COVID. If you wanted to be effective, improve your ventilation. If you want to be effective, maybe spend $100 million on providing N95 masks available for the public. But no, this is theater and it's wasted money. It may be good, but it's not good for the purpose that it's being advertised. Hygiene theater builds a false sense of security that can lead to more infections. People just shouldn't be indoors without masks until the Delta variant has been, this fourth wave has been neutralized. Now I'm speaking to you in September 2021. So, take it as history. I'm sure if you're listening to this in the future, which you will be because I'm the one that's listening to it right now, we should be spending on improving ventilation, not disinfecting surfaces. But this leads me to another question, and it's the question of vaccinations and mandatory vaccinations. Now, personally, in my ethics, I feel that people should have control over their bodies, and what they put in it should be their choice. I feel pretty strongly about that. If they don't want the vaccination, they shouldn't be forced to put it into themselves. However, there are more important points that would overrule this personal right, and that is if you are significantly increasing the chance of harming somebody else, that right overrules your right. And that's important. Not everybody is confident about the vaccine. They shouldn't be forced to take it. You shouldn't be put in duress if you can help it and not injure others. You should also not be allowed to spread the disease to the others or increase their risk. They should be asked to stay out of public areas where they are likely to increase the risk of others. Yes, this should be some form of keeping these people away, and this is the discussion then that moves on to the vaccine passport. But one thing I want to tell my listeners and discuss with you is that this has become a polarizing issue. The name calling is not going to lead to increased compliance. Calling them stupid, making fun of people or shaming them is not a good route to compliance. We need to address their concerns, and it seems for those of us who've been in this for years and working hard on this, the medical community, the doctors, the nurses, obviously it feels like you're hitting a brick wall, hitting your head against a brick wall day after day when people aren't listening and people aren't vaccinating and aren't masking. But not everybody has the time or the capability to analyze the data, and not all of them trust the big pharmas, and not all of them trust the institutions, and that's understandable. Okay? Now, vaccine passports in and of themselves are an incursion into the privacy of personal medical decisions. If you have to show, Bob at the door to the arena whether or not you've decided personally to take this vaccine or not, that seems very intrusive. It's a step beyond what we've allowed in the past. Yes, for attending public school, people have had to show their vaccines to the government in a very controlled way. But vaccine passports, leaving this open to proprietors of private shops to decide whether or not to screen people comes with a risk of discrimination. It comes with a risk of racial profiling. It comes with a lot of risks. So the real question that we should be asking ourselves is what we're doing justifiable, reasonable, and proportionate to the risk that's being presented. Okay? That's what needs to be done by the people that are implementing these decisions. Policies that hold vaccination status as a precondition to participating in public life do run a risk of rendering a voluntary vaccination regime into a de facto mandatory requirement, especially when people are being fired from their jobs and losing their livelihoods over these things. That's duress. So you're forcing people to do something that they're not comfortable with under duress. And that has a very high standard. I think to give up that level of personal autonomy to the state or to whoever is forcing you to do this requires a very high standard of certainty to justify. So we need to do this with our eyes wide open, I think. For example, I think if you work from home and don't interact with the public and have your groceries delivered to you and don't go out to the arena or to public places, you should have the option of continuing to work without a vaccine. That's my position. I still think, and I know that the vaccines are safe. I know that they've been tested. I know, I've read the medical literature that's coming out about the long-term effects, non-existent long-term effects of the vaccine over long-term being, 6 to 9 months so far, where they have good, solid statistical data of hundreds of millions of people taking this vaccine and saving lives. But there are many folks who have become hesitant to take this vaccine who have not hesitated in the past. People who previously were pro-vaccine and were, understanding of the fact that, vaccines prevent mumps, they eradicated smallpox, they prevent a lot of very dangerous diseases. And these people, many of these people are hesitant to take this vaccine. Now, is that rational? It's unsurprising. If you recall, these vaccines were introduced under Donald Trump's Republican administration with Operation Warp Speed. That would give a lot of people a second thought. If you can't read the medical literature and this is your understanding of how these vaccines were made and the fact that the vaccination manufacturers got a waiver on liability, it's not necessarily irrational to say that you're a little bit suspicious. This is a little sus, right? Donald Trump is not a paragon of trustworthiness. The founder of Trump University. That being said, I want to reassure my listeners that the vaccines are effective at preventing transmission, or preventing infection, I should say. They're not 100% effective. And they're less effective against the Delta variant than they are against the other variants. But we don't have enough statistics yet on the Delta variant to say how effective the vaccines are, but they cut down your chance of being infected. They cut down the viral load that you have if you get infected, and they significantly cut down your risk of dying if you get infected. And by cutting down your viral load, it means you're less contagious. So the professionals who dedicate their lives to saving yours have done a marvelous job on these vaccines. I understand that. The way to address people that are vaccine hesitant is to get them to talk to their doctors. Now, I know doctors don't have charge codes for addressing vaccine hesitant patients, and that's a problem in our society. But you need to get them to talk to medical professionals. You need them to seek out people they trust that can read the medical literature. There are good discussion groups on Facebook where the data is available, evidence-based discussion groups. The risk of getting COVID is orders of magnitude higher, and the side effects and the long-term side effects from COVID are known. They exist. So far, there's no expectation that there's any long-term side effects to the vaccines. Now, obviously, they've only been out there for 9 months or so, or a year. But of any side effects from vaccines, they usually happen over the first 8 weeks. There are, as far as I know, no known vaccine side effects beyond that time period that show up later. So we're in the safe zone here for these vaccines. And if you continue to have questions, go to your health providers, go to your doctors. It really is important that you get this vaccine, and it is really important that you mask up, even if you have the vaccine, until the local caseload goes down for Delta variant especially, which is a very nasty bug that is easily highly contagious. We're going to have to take continued precautions. But let's make sure that the precautions are effective and justified. And we need to balance the effects on people with their personal rights and liberties. The next part I want to talk about in this podcast is one that's maybe not as life and death, but is really annoying. Really. It's SecurityTheater at the airport. And this has become a thing after the 9/11 hijackings. We have to go through a horrible, humiliating SecurityTheater at the airport. And every time another terrorist is caught trying to do something, we add an act to our SecurityTheater. We have to go through the metal scanners. We have to unload all of our stuff onto the X-ray belt. We have to take our change out of our pockets and put it into the little box. We have to open up our computers and show that they're working in case it's a computer bomb. We need to take off our shoes and put them onto the conveyor in case they're shoe bombs. We have to stand in the terahertz scanning thing and put our hands up and have security personnel X-ray vision through our clothes in case we have something hidden. How many bottles of water have been confiscated? How many bottles of alcohol are confiscated at security? And you know why those are being taken. This isn't keeping you safer. How many unfortunate travelers have been disarmed of their nail clippers and their razors? Now, you could say that this is keeping you safe. Maybe it is. It's keeping you safe from what? I don't know. You can pay to have a detailed background check, have someone comb through your references and check your financial status, and some government person can tell you that you can skip to the front of the line now because you paid to have this special pass. The huge lines at security have now become soft targets for terrorists. There was a terrorist attack outside of the secure perimeter at an airport, and I think in Turkey and in Belgium there's been attacks killing tens of people because they've been stuck outside of the airport. Tom Makaitis from Chicago's St. Paul University said, "I've seen in this country us waste literally millions of dollars in what I call placebo security. Highly visual measures like armed guards strutting up and down in your airports, creating a feeling of well-being and a feeling of security without providing any real added benefit." The person who coined the word SecurityTheater, Bruce Schneier, states, When people are scared, they need something done that will make them feel safe, even if it doesn't truly make them safer. Politicians naturally want to do something in response to crisis, even if that something doesn't make any sense. And that, I think, is the key with Security Theater. It's the fact that politicians feel helpless, but need to be seen to be doing something. Shire continues, 2 things that have made flying safer since 9/11 are reinforcing the cockpit doors and persuading passengers that they need to fight back. Everything beyond that isn't worth it. How many shoe bombers have been caught after the original? What are we getting for all of this humiliation and delay? What's the rational amount to spend to prevent terrorist attacks on airplanes? What's the cost-to-benefit ratio? Well, it's easy to find from the TSA website. TSA officials say aviation security continues to evolve to address ever-changing threats with a layered approach that involves surveillance, intelligence, and technology. The agency has 65,000 employees and spends $8 billion each year in an effort to stay one step ahead of potential foreign and domestic terrorists. $8 billion a year of security theater at airports. What are we getting for this? A warm feeling of security? In 2015, undercover TSA agents attempted to smuggle weapons onto airplanes. The TSA had a 5% success rate in blocking them. So we're stopping 5%. Now sure, maybe the chance of getting caught will dissuade a terrorist. I'm sure they have to think a little bit about how to do this. But you can actually think about what's the impact of this security theater. It can be argued that making people line up like cattle for their ritualistic dehumanizing searches and pat-downs actually costs lives. If people avoid flying long distance and decide to drive instead due to all the hassle and the pain, they're much more likely to be killed in an automobile accident. And we can quantify this, and there's a rational way to look at it. Studies suggest that post 9/11, security measures reduced airplane passenger volume by 6%. And each time it gets more hassle to take a plane a certain distance, people are going to drive that distance instead. If this 6% decrease in air travel resulted in these people driving instead, this would lead to approximately 129 additional automobile deaths every 3 months. That's equivalent to one fully loaded Boeing 737 crashing 4 times a year. So let's think about that. That's the unintended consequences of this security theater. So are we preventing 4 Boeing 737s a year from crashing by doing this? Is there a better way to do security? Maybe using this $8 billion to address the unrest, the sources of unrest that lead to increased terrorism, that lead to radicalization of domestic kids who basically feel left out of society, who feel alienated, and who are easy targets for slick advertisements from disgruntled groups. I think you could make a bigger dent by letting people walk onto airplanes without the security and using that money wisely. Now, sure, many people would say that maybe it's better that people aren't flying much. It's definitely better for the environment. Flying is a huge carbon footprint. Now, as an eco-modernist, I would say we should be using nuclear power to be making green hydrogen through thermal electrolysis and using that green hydrogen to produce abundant synth fuels with no carbon footprint. That's what I would say. I would say we should be able to fly, and we should be able to use nuclear power to make clean, zero-emission fuel. Maybe by making flying horrible, we are actually helping the environment. But if this is the motivation, let's be upfront about it. And it's not the motivation. This is just a knee-jerk reaction from politicians and people trying to look like they're doing something. And it's not a good way to spend money. And it doesn't have the effects that we want. And people don't stand up about this. How can you stand up about this? How can you stand up against something that is making you safer? How can you protest against having your shoes x-rayed? It's for the children. How can you protest the Patriot Act? You unpatriotic SOB. We need to waterboard these Muslims to make you safer. It's so hard to stand up and do the right thing. But that's why we have The Rational View. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/TheRationalView. Thanks for listening.